Weirdly, it says that I'm signed out of Zoom. That can't be right, right?
Well, try signing back in again then.
Okay, no, we're live. I think that's fine. I don't think that it matters whether or not. So I've just gone through to okay, post your discussion. Here we are, and I'm just sending you the thing. I'm going to send it to you on Facebook. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. And then just open up and get going, and I'll do the programming stuff.
Okay, cool. Oh fuck! Come on!
All right.
Okay, so that is the YouTube link. It's in Facebook Messenger. Got it? Great. Cool.
Not yet. Yes, I've got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I'm gonna admit everyone then.
Sweet.
Evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so we're now we are live streaming on YouTube right now. Welcome. I'm just gonna stop myself for a bit. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you all here. My name is Tyrrell Jones. I imagine most of you know that, but some maybe not. And I'm one half of Naive Theatre. Sam Redway is the other half of Naive Theatre. Who's waving just there. Right,
my speaker's not working. I just checked it.
I think whoever that is, your speaker's definitely working. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you for coming to COVID Lockdown Breath Machine sort of post-show discussion or post-week-long broadcast discussion. Other artists here are also Robert Bentel, who is Rob. Can you give us a wave? Yeah, he designed and composed the sound design on COVID Lockdown Breath Machine, and I think we might also have Lavinia somewhere.
Yes. Hello.
We've got a Lavinia. We've got the right Lavinia Murray as well.
Hello.
I can hear you but not see you. But she's there. So you can, and also obviously Sam, who was both the dramaturg and many of the voices that you heard. Thank you for coming. And this is really, and thanks for coming to Digital Lyceum as well. As you may or may not have noticed, we've had this kind of 8-week program of work, which we're about halfway through at the moment. All the stuff that we've put on is things that are trying to an experiment with new ways of creating digital content and new ways of reaching audiences. And part of what we're doing with these post-show discussions is we're wanting to have conversations with audiences about what is interesting, what works, what doesn't work, and how it's experienced for an audience, and what it is like for you guys. We're trying to kind of channel all this learning that we're doing and make the most of it. So it's really, I guess this is an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions if you want to ask questions, but also it's an opportunity for us as artists to kind of ask you questions and actually find out what it was like for you and how you experienced it. So we can get a bit more of an insight into how this kind of work comes across, reaches an audience, or touches you or doesn't touch you, depending. So I had my first question for everybody, and the thing that I've been most kind of upset by and found most difficult since we released it. I started worrying about how everybody was experiencing it and worrying about whether or not I'd given everyone clear enough instructions about how to listen to it, and then whether or not that mattered at all. So the first thing I'd like to ask you all is, how you actually experienced it. Were you sitting down? Did you close your eyes? Were you in a dark room, in a bright room? What were you looking at, and what was that like? That's my biggest question for everyone right now. So yeah, I'm going to be quiet for a bit now and hope someone has a response.
I'll go first, Toby, if nobody else is going.
Yeah,
first.
great.
Yeah. So I've listened to it. I listened to it twice. And the first time I did it, eyes closed, sat down, which I felt, and as dark a room as I managed, which felt pretty authentic. And then the second time, because I knew that you were going to be doing this and I kind of wanted to understand the thing more, I listened to it again, but then did so in a kind of slightly more subconscious way. I was doing other things at the same time and not doing it as intended. And I got a lot out of it from both experiences.
That's really interesting. That is very interesting. Cool. That is very useful. Anyone else like to contribute to that? Or just put something in the chat if you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, Anne.
Yeah, I was the opposite from to Ben. The first time I listened, I felt quite uncomfortable, really, because I'm not used to sitting doing nothing when I'm listening to things. But I realised about halfway through that it would have been much better sitting in the dark, and so I listened to it again, and I sat perfectly still, almost undisturbed, and it was pretty dark and it was great.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's really cool. Okay, that's really interesting. Great. Okay, so in both ways, I'm really interested in to anyone else who would like to share how they listen to it. I'd really love to know. Tara.
Hi everyone. Thank you.
Tara, I think we've kind of lost you there. Maybe I'll come back to you when your internet has maybe stabilized a bit, or you could try saying it with your video off, perhaps. Might help. I'll come back to you. Hi, Jen. Thanks for joining us. I'm just asking everyone how they experienced the piece, just out of curiosity. So anyone who has a thought on or would just like to let us know how they listened to it, I'm just really interested in that.
I just listened to it on my couch, with quite all the lights off and stuff, which I thought was really impactful. I'm glad that you guys recommended that. Although I did tell Fran this when the spider came on, I felt like it was in the corner of my room and it was Sam's face, but that's only because I visualized it very intensely. And obviously I've seen him perform before and stuff, so but the connection with all the other characters wasn't the same, they were their own thing, but in my head that it was just massive spider in the corner and Sam's face. So yeah, it was amazing.
That's really interesting. So yeah, really interesting that there's these different kind of experiences, and also people listening to it again in a different way. Anne, do you feel like we gave you enough sort of guidance on how to experience it? Would you have appreciated more, or was that just good to discover yourself?
I think it was really good. In fact, I asked my boyfriend to listen to it. Well, I said, oh, you need to listen to this. And then he was like, I'm going to listen to it in the car tomorrow. And I was like, well, no, you can't do that. I was like, just listen to it for 1 minute with your headphones in, and then you'll know why. And so he just put his headphones in and did 1 minute and was like, oh, right, okay, I get it. And then the next day he listened to the whole thing. So I think that that thing at the beginning with the left-right thing was really good. And I think for me, that was one way of sort of being oh yeah, that's why you need to do that. And he just was like, all right, I'll listen to the whole thing. That one like that. So I felt that was really impactful from the start, and also gave you some kind of direction in terms of why it needed to be that way. Oh,
that's cool. That's cool. But Tara, it looks like your connection has stabilized. Do you want to give that another go?
Yeah. Hi. Hello. that okay?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, we just had to get nearer the bar. So I'm in SVA venue space with Joe, and we both had different sofas to lie on, and it was dark, as you saw when we came in. So it's kind of deeply relaxing. It's an empty, very comfortable venue space, and our experiences were quite different because Joe's having to troubleshoot some, we should say, just had to respond to various things on the phone halfway through messaging, which I was oblivious to. And also I just lost the internet on the last moment, last kind of few minutes, because I was watching it just up until this talk. But anyway, it's great to have it so much in your brain and to be really closing off all your senses everywhere else. And I also appreciated kind of coming into it, turning it on in my own time, because I was at Stamping in the Graveyard last time. And there's just a little bit of nervousness about when you're trying to get everything ready and make sure you're in the right position, So that's kind of interesting as well, a little bit about getting settled into a show, in this online situation. Like people have been mentioned, they're able to choose when they're turning it on and off and re-listening to it. But then there's an excitement from, so I'm kind of turning into the kind of meta level about when, how you position an experience like this as well, whether you've got to be there on the dot or whether you can listen to it in your own time. Anyway, I found that fantastic to get really into all the sounds around around the head. But I can imagine that, I wouldn't want to be distracted by other things too much, but it's very affecting. I don't know. I'll have to try listening to it when other things are happening, just as an experiment, But especially because of the nature of the story and the mood, you just get right into the place and the character and the sounds of what's happening. I think you can totally switch off. So, yeah.
That's really interesting.
Isolated with her, yeah.
And Joe, did you find that your messages and things interrupting, did that completely take you out of it, or were you able to return to it? That's one of the questions that I've been wondering, whether if people get distracted.
Well, I think because of the kind of use of the use of that particular type of sound, I think you kind of listen with your body. That's what I found. To be really honest, I didn't follow the story because I got very distracted with these kind of, I actually got 2 very urgent phone calls. I should have switched it off, but once I was texting, I wasn't talking to anyone, but it just really frustrated me because I didn't follow the story. So I will definitely listen to it properly again. But I think with those kind of it's a little bit like the ASMR thing, where, do you know ASMR?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's almost, for me, it felt very in my body. That's what it felt like, even though I didn't know what was going on. And so when I kind of came back into it again, I felt like I could just very easily go back into it, even though I wasn't actually following the story in a proper, in a literal way. I felt like it made me feel some of the sounds made me feel very uncomfortable. And I'm sure that's what I was meant to feel. And yeah, just particular mouth sounds with the mouth was really, I found that really hard to listen to, almost so that I wanted to turn it off. And that was, it's like, oh, I don't like that. It's like, it was like this sort of feeling. That's what it made me feel. But, that was very effective.
Do you think those sounds being unpleasant, was it the ones that were associated with COVID that were particularly anxiety inducing?
Yeah.
And do you think that's because of the context of where we are right now? Or do you think that you would feel deeply uncomfortable with that regardless of the time and the context in which you were listening?
I think it would be, I think it's very poignant, obviously, now, having learnt so much about the effects it can have on people's, breathing and lungs, But yeah, whatever. I think those kind of sounds have a very deep effect on you, because you don't normally, you don't often in normal life, you don't get to have a sense of that, even if you're with someone who's extremely unwell, you don't really get a sense of what it's feeling like for them. and to have that literally in your ears, it feels like it's happening to you.
So I have two questions for you all. The two things that I've been sort of worrying over for the last week or so whilst it's been up. Well, one is whether or not we should give our audience clearer instructions about how to listen to it. And a second is whether or not we should give our audience warnings about the more distressing content in the piece. And I'm curious to know what people think about that.
Yeah, I think it would be good. I think it would be good to do one, because I was thinking there was a little bit that just made me slightly panicky. Though I was thinking if I was more unstable, this could lead to a little bit of a panic. Potentially, if I was, potentially it could build up to quite a major panic feeling.
I mean, if you remember, I left it until the last minute to listen to it for the first time, or quite late on in the week, because I was quarantining because I might have had COVID, and I didn't want to listen to that whilst I had COVID if I had COVID. So I waited until I knew I was symptomless and kind of managed it that way. But yeah.
So there was quite a lot of anticipation and anxiety around the act of actually turning it on. That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, that's really useful for us to know.
Yeah, I would agree as well. Like if it goes, like when it goes to like sort of like large audiences and things, it might be good, like, just to put some kind of, I guess, trigger warnings or something around it, just for people that like potentially like whose families members have like passed away from COVID and stuff like that. But like ultimately, I did feel like it was extremely uplifting, like and optimistic, as I know a lot of people have said already. But yeah, it might be good to do, just in case. Even people with anxiety, like the sound of breathing, if you were like replicating that a little bit. But yeah, overall, I didn't think it was like a negative portrayal though, or like negative experience. It was just more sort of like a journey that like came out sort of on the other side. But I agree with Ben as well. Like I think I took a COVID test like a month ago. But I think if I was a bit worried about it, I would find it like a bit challenging, or maybe like put it off a bit.
Yeah, definitely had one piece of feedback of someone who thought they were developing COVID symptoms around on the same day as listening to the piece. So kind of interesting there.
It's quite interesting as someone that had symptoms of breathlessness that I didn't find it at all anxiety inducing. I think it's the idea of what those symptoms would be like if you haven't experienced them that is the potentially problematic thing. Which is quite interesting. I mean, you do bill it as saying, a journey through the symptoms of COVID, don't you? So I feel like in terms of content warnings, it's sort of there, but maybe explicitly saying breathlessness or like, experience of breathlessness. And it is quite, I got the sense that it was quite mild, to be honest. So.
Compared with your reality. I guess for people that haven't had that at all, the anticipation of what that might be like is maybe even bigger.
Yeah.
Which is interesting as well, because that's part of it probably, is that like, like having not gone through it, or people that haven't gone through it, like there is that whole anxiety around it of what that experience would be. So I think that's almost like lends itself to the piece, like it's sort of like relaying, this idea of like, oh, everyone's really, really anxious. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people are very anxious about like contracting it. Like what would that mean, all these things. So I think that's probably part of it as well.
It's interesting though, in the sense that it sort of does destigmatize the idea of having breathlessness a bit, because for the vast majority of people, symptoms of breathlessness are going to be like a temporary symptom of an illness. Yeah, it's interesting, I guess, like how you package it and how you kind of how much kind of you need to guide people towards the experience that they then like have listening to it is quite an interesting question. How much of the narrative kind of content do you relay, and how much of the symptoms and all that kind of stuff.
So I guess that is another good, that's kind of my last question for everyone is what did they take from the narrative, and what was their sense of it? Because obviously it's quite a surreal journey, almost kind of Wonderland like, I'd be really interested to know, without priming people too much or saying what I thought it was about, what people thought it was about, because it's certainly it's an interesting text, and in a challenging text. I think certainly I found it so to work on. I'm just putting everyone on the spot now, aren't I? Why don't we just leave that? And if we go on.
There's lots of different things to say about it, but just kind of starting from the beginning, I appreciated this feeling of this character. You just got a really strong sense of it, and her relationship issues, and just how symbolic it is to lose your phone charger, and thinking of that, but that you're kind of about to go on into a journey that's going to go into that space of being more and more kind of isolated in a kind of trippy situation from what the story's about. But it's that kind of building up a little bit of that frustration, and knowing that, it's just a really good picture of the time, isn't it? Of the going out and hearing the claps and things. It's like a sort of, it is really difficult listening to it now, but it's also something that's such a thing which is an archive of, it's daring to be doing it as well. It is challenging, and things like you're saying about the bodily sounds and stuff, and there's, interestingly, as people are saying, that anxiety that you have more about what you might get is very, has been a big thing around this whole period. Again, something that I'd like to listen to again, to go into the dream time of, and how certain things are sort of amplified, the astrolabe, and the going into the sort of space of objects, which she's been mentioning to start with. But I did lose it just at the end with my internet. So again, I feel like it's a little bit incomplete. Yeah. But the transition of her, tension, and then going into different phases of peacefulness within it as well, because there is that too, isn't there? There's that, like, say, kind of bit of a wonderland moments. But
no, that's really cool. That's really good. I guess another thing that I have a question for everyone, unless, Ben, do you want to talk about?
No, I don't have to. It's cool, man.
I was just going to say that if this is, I'm also interested in terms of what people would like to know from this discussion, and if you have questions for other audience members or questions for us, this is a great time to throw that open.
Okay, Toby, because I can segue quite smoothly into answering your previous question and then asking a question.
That's beautiful.
So the way that I experienced the story was this kind of arc shape, where you have reality on one side and you have reality at the end, and then we delve deeper and deeper and deeper into the midpoint of the work, and each episode, because it was Odyssey-like in a way, and each episode made complete sense in and of itself. But then when you compare them to each other, it becomes very trippy indeed, and becomes hard to follow, but not in a critical way. I don't mean that in a critical way. I really enjoyed that was the case, but you have these perfect little episodes of things where I'm like, yeah, I completely understand the logic of this. And then when they're placed next to each other in conflict and in contrast, you're just like, what? And then you arrive at the middle at this song, which I thought was beautifully placed structurally, kind of like at the depth of this V shape from reality to nonsense and then back to reality again. And I wanted to know about this song because I found it very moving. And I wanted to know how it worked with the script as well, like from a practical level. Was that song in the script, and did it say there's a song here, or was this something that was kind of workshopped like workshopped in collaboration? Were the lyrics first and then Rob wrote some music and then it went back into the studio? I'm really curious about that moment.
It was actually, I think, in the script, and I don't think it was a suggestion either. So Lavinia can actually answer this potentially. I think this would be a great moment to bring Lavinia in.
Oh, crikey. Hello. Yes, it was in the script. It was.
You're misnamed, Lavinia. You're misnamed
Yeah.
admin because you know
Oh, right.
you're
Okay.
you're an artist. So but,
Oh, crikey.
but maybe you are admin today. But
Absolutely.
for everyone who's watching on YouTube, admin is Lavinia Murray, and is the writer of this piece.
Yes, sorry, it's Michael's. My computer broke, and I'm on Michael's, and for some reason he's called admin. I'd always thought he was Michael, so my mistake. I married admin, not Michael. Yes, it was always there. I wanted the song because it's a traditional song, and it's a song about missing a beloved. And it's a keening song, and it seemed to tie in with the keening winds, and it's all about the wind, the weather, and mortality and loss. So it just seemed to be the perfect song to put there. I hope that helps.
It really does. Thank you. Yes, it did seem to like kind of crystallize a lot of the ideas leading up to that point and then leading on from it, which is why I was so drawn to it. So thanks for telling me.
You're welcome.
It's a 15th century song, is it, Lavinia?
I believe so. Yes, it is a traditional one. It's one that's it's obviously got such an emotional impact that it's remained with us. It's a song that is still in some repertoires, singing repertoires, but it's a song I came across when I was probably a young teenager, and it just stayed with me. It just has that element. It has an element of real sadness and longing, and I've not really heard that crystallized in something so short and solemn, but also it's kind of got soul to it. There's a real, you get the sense of a real person missing another real person, and just the weather, you know, it's the weather in my bed, it's like the idea of all of a sudden the comfort of actually just another human presence in that perfectly comfortable bed away from everything. So it just seemed, it just hit me that ought to be the song there, and that it ought to be a song. It's just one of those things that you get when you're writing a script. It seemed the right thing for her, for the protagonist. And the right thing to connect everything. It's like the beating heart of the whole thing. That because there's hope there, even though it's so sad. There's the song is still hopeful, and it's like the memory is the thing which is driving the person forward, and the hope that this memory will actually become a reality again. So that's why it's there. It's yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you, Lavinia.
You're welcome.
One of the interesting things for us when we were thinking about how to do the song was we were like, well, how does a woman sing who has no voice, who's lost her, who has no breath, and how do you sing without breath? And so we then spent quite a lot of time trying to work out the sort of the least sounded singing that we could have, with the minimal lung force behind it, and so that's how we kind of ended up with that very close, slightly unvoiced or half voiced singing tone, which felt really nice in that it just happened that it really worked with the tune and the music, and Rob had the suggestion of really slowing it right down, so that I think most performances are about double that speed that we found anyway. So we really slowed it down and tried to find a way of that feeling almost cracked. It's very difficult to get, and both Sam and Sophie did a fantastic job of actually managing to get sung notes without putting anything behind it, from the lungs. So that was quite a balancing act, I think, from them.
They were amazing. Yes, they were absolutely amazing.
Yeah, just to butt in on that, there's a bit more to it as well. I think just to riff on what you said, Lavinia. There is this kind of solemn quality to it, and like it's really beautiful that again it kind of sits in that medieval space. And part of the fun of stringing the song together was to then underpin it with some recordings of me playing the nyckelharpa, which is a medieval Swedish keyed instrument. But actually, I didn't feel it was dramatic enough musically. There's some you can, if you listen to the original, it's very upbeat. It's a bit too quick to really be in the pace of the piece for me. And then I thought the kind of chunky medieval harmony was a bit crass, so I actually rewrote the harmony as well. What you're hearing under it is an adjustment, so that the chords all of a sudden are a bit more kind of epic. There's almost a kind of reference to kind of 20th century film music in some of the harmonic progressions. It's a bit more stately, a bit more drawn out.
Thank you, Rob. I did not know all that was going on. It's one of the beautiful things just discovering now. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of the moments as well. I mean, I don't know if anyone else found that, but there's a couple of moments that really make me emotional, and that's one of them. And the other one is waking up and feeling very, very breathless. But I think that's because I did my absolute best to recreate an experience that I had when I had COVID. So that's just triggering for me every time I listen to it. But those are the two moments that really upset me every time. But yeah, and I think that's partly the choice of that music is one of the reasons.
I was thinking about how I was speaking to a very close friend the other day about how much I love the protagonist and how connected I felt from like very early on. Like it felt like really authentic, which I think can be really difficult sometimes sort of to like really believe in it. Like just obviously when you're just getting it sort of from an auditory perspective. But like I kind of had two questions. One was around sort of whether you would like release something around the actual production, because the tech itself is so interesting. And I think that like that in and of itself is like a really interesting sort of like backstory into like how it was done, especially in like these sort of like circumstances. And the second was like what is going to happen moving forward, because like not obviously, but I do think that in the next like 6 months we'll see lots of pieces reacting sort of to COVID, like from like whatever as like creative responses, whether it's like TV or film or whatever, but sort of like how that will like, obviously this is one that's while it's happening. So it'd be interesting to see like how you think you'll be able to sort of like use it as like archival creative response, like being that it's literally been created while it's happening as opposed to just like as a reaction to it afterwards. So those are my two kind of questions around it.
Yeah, I guess that's a really interesting suggestion about having a bit of the making of, or a bit of a sense of how it was done, because yeah, I mean, maybe if people are really interested in that, maybe that is something that we could write about or sort of talk about a little bit more in context of the piece. I guess particularly in terms of just the how, there were lots of things like the placement in relation to the ears that we used. So when we were doing the stuff with the throat, we had Sophie was standing in front of the microphone. I can't, it's hard to explain with that. I'm just going to use my headphones like it's the microphone. There's obviously, ear. And so she was standing like here and making the noise in the same place that your throat would be in relation to the ears, if that makes sense. So she made all the noises from your throat, as it were. But then when she's talking behind your head. And that we worked out that was like the most intimate way of her speaking to you. And so, yeah, there's lots of kind of interesting things that I guess we discovered in sort of the placement in terms of how that particular bit of technology works. And also Rob, I think, has gone on a big journey with that as well. We did half of it in a studio and half of it not in a studio, and kind of really discovered that we liked the being outside of the studio more, partly because there's lots of like mistakes that happen, well, not mistakes, but real life happens, and then you end up capturing it a bit like the ducks in the final scene. And there's this moment where Sophie's just, you know, in character acting, and the ducks start taking off from Sam's park, and she goes, "Oh wow!" And you just couldn't do that. You couldn't construct that in such a way with the timing, and so the binaural mic just gets all of that atmosphere and people walking around. It's like being on set. And so we certainly discovered that being in a studio, actually, I don't think we'd bit of a waste of money, really. Although it was a fantastic studio, they were really great, really nice to us, but we really discovered how nice like reality is, and you know,
yeah,
that
was kind of what we did get, and we had that day in the studio, and not only did we not get any atmosphere, you know, it was a kind of, I was actually doing a big lecture for some university students, and I was kind of really reflecting on this journey and trying to explain how it had traveled, of sort of trying to like get to grips with this recording technology. It's quite unusual, and normally, you know, you think of radio pieces, everything's, you know, quite controlled, there's a close delivery of the voice to the mic, but actually it was quite unsatisfying. It wasn't really helped by having a recording engineer who'd never really seen or heard of a binaural mic. You sort of had a rough idea what it was, but made things a little bit difficult in the studio. And as time went along with the piece, we sort of got to this point where we're like, okay, yeah, real life is satisfying. That's what we need. It needs to be there, so the character, the protagonist, can be in the space, and I think you get a kind of almost a better sense of the protagonist because the recording takes place where she would be. And just to kind of like tie that up, I had a mentoring session with another sound designer, and just back on what Tyrrell just said, he sort of alluded to this idea that using a binaural mic is much more like shooting a film than making a piece of radio. You capture the atmosphere, you have props on set, what happened with the ducks outside, just everything about life is contained within it, which is much the opposite of radio production, where you kind of sew it all together afterwards.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting seeing some of the shots, some of the photos you'd taken during the recording, when I think just when you were posting about the piece on Facebook. And I think there is that almost that kind of question or that tension there of, you've created this sort of like piece that is designed to be heard and I guess embodied in terms of the way that you've recorded it. But then this question of like how you package that experience, what information you give people before they listen to it, but also maybe like what visuals they're able to see, so that how much do you want to guide people in terms of how they conceptualize the space? And because obviously there is this sense of, you know, apart from the sort of ending, everything's taking place in the sort of landscape of this person's flat, and everything is kind of like being translated into that space. So it was quite interesting to, you know, see a picture of, I think, Sophie on a sofa, and the sundial with the lump of cheese, and like the pen and the lampshade there, which also felt like an entirely surreal photograph, because I was kind of like in my brain trying to work out why on earth you needed to construct the prop itself to get the sound, like, do you know what I mean? But like the level of kind of like, yeah, you got that real sense that this was something that actually kind of almost happened in reality and was recorded in a way. So that was quite an interesting visual representation of it, where you're kind of maintaining that distinction between being like, this isn't the piece, but it's a kind of visual representation of the process of making the piece. So because that was what I started thinking about when Jen commented about, you know, would you kind of let people in on the production a bit more, because that's an interesting part of it. So that was something that occurred to me then.
Yeah, just to again riff on that, what we were doing with the binaural mic is quite unusual. I did quite a lot of research, just like trying to see where it crops up, and its most common use seems to be on within the ASMR community, which is largely of people with this microphone set up often in a home environment, like producing quite intimate sounds into each ear of the binaural mic. This is certainly something that elicits either very positive or negative responses. And we've also seen some examples in theatre with a binaural mic being used in a piece by a company called Complicite called The Encounter. But that's on stage. And so what we're doing is neither of those things. it is a theatrical performance. It's not an ASMR stream, but it's in the home, unlike the Complicité piece where the mic is on a stage. It's a halfway house. And again, that kind of idea of it being like an audio film, like a piece of cinema for the ear. The idea of the script and the piece, it's a journey, and you kind of do those things in real time with the protagonist, and I think that's what's really satisfying in a kind of storytelling way, rather than in radio where what you do is record the voice and all those elements of the story, people traveling, moving into a new room, that's all done in what they call Foley, where those sounds are just kind of jigsawed together. So that's quite a different experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was, yeah, I think it was a lump of Wensleydale that we stuck the pencil in. It was but it was a very satisfying thud. But yeah, it is interesting, that kind of tension between those two things. And yeah, maybe it would be a nice idea for us to share some of that. Maybe that will be a nice companion to the piece. So it's a nice idea, Jen. In response to your other question about whether or not it has a life beyond this, I mean, I have no idea, because we've never really made anything like this before. And so, yeah, I have no idea what people will think of it in a year's time, whether people will kind of be like, oh yeah, this is an archival kind of moment in time, and whether it'll gain significance or whether the significance will dissolve. And it's just really hard to know. Like the first show that we made, Bin Laden, the one-man show, we were like, oh, we need to make this really quick because everyone would have forgotten about who Bin Laden is, because we made it after he died, and then just every time like something happened, like, I mean, when ISIS happened, suddenly there was like a whole new interest, and we were being booked for tours like everywhere. And so it was just really hard to know, because we thought that was over, and then events happened and it became relevant again. So it's impossible to know. And I feel like, I mean, this pandemic could obviously, I mean, you know, it might be that vaccines mean that we're all going back to some level of normality by next summer, and that doesn't really come back, possibly. Or it might be that this kind of goes on and on, or I don't know, maybe people will forget about it, and then in 10 years' time there'll be another pandemic of something else, and suddenly everyone will be listening to it. I don't know. It's just impossible to know when you've made something whether or not what the life is going to be beyond it. I
guess my question to that is, because I do think it is so, like, not just relevant, but like will continue to be important. And like, are you thinking of after sort of like the digitalizing period of like sort of placing where it will be like placed, if it will like be continued to be able to be listened to and things like that? I know that it's like in this sort of block right now, as part of sort of what you guys are doing, but I just wondered where it would be sort of how it would sort of exist in the future.
Well, I mean, we're certainly going to have it available until the end of our season on the 12th of December. I don't really know where to go next. I mean, we haven't thought much about it. Certainly, I know lots of people have been mentioning BBC Sounds as a good outlet. I know that, and that might be interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a kind of form, and I guess it kind of brings me on to the other question that I have for people, is whether or not this is a form that people are fundamentally more interested in, or just interested in a different way to radio, and where people think that should rightly sit. I know Darkfield, who are another theatre company who specialise in using binaural technology, have created a couple of pieces that are on an app where they instruct you to sit in pitch black, and it's basically a haunting. It's a horror experience where you put your headphones on and you are convinced that there's a ghost in your house. And that's all via an app. So that's an interesting distribution model. I know that BBC Sounds have released a couple of things, I think mostly on Radio 3, where they recommend binaural, but obviously you can't broadcast this on radio because no one has because radio isn't broadcast this way, so it has to be experienced digitally to have the left-right information. So I guess BBC Sounds, most people, more and more people listen to radio on the internet now. So I guess that makes it possible. But I don't know. I mean, would people, you know, would people listen to something that was binaural specifically on their BBC Sounds app, or how would people want to experience binaural work? Do people want to experience binaural work? Is this kind of thing that you go, you know, yes, yeah, go on, yeah, Anne.
I would definitely do that again. I never experienced it before, and I thought it was just amazing. So if there was something, I suppose the subject would have to interest me, I would try it again, definitely.
And how do you think you would be most likely to experience it? Would just getting an email about it, or it being online somewhere, or being told about it be enough for you, or would you prefer for it to be on a kind of established platform? Do you think that make it more likely for you to engage?
Probably an established platform would be more likely if it was something I was used to anyway. I mean, I'm not young, as you can see, and new things are sometimes a struggle, especially technology. But yeah, I would certainly be interested if I found out about it. Anyway, Rob would keep me informed, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it really, that's really interesting, and really cool. Yeah, go on, Tara.
Well, depth of field was just this kept popping into my brain, and with these conversations about this sort of filmic nature of it, and that it's got that sort of multi-dimensionality. And I think especially in the absence of being able to have live theatre events, there's this feeling of really taking you kind of physically, much more physically into a space around you. And I was interested to hear about how sensitive it is in terms of like not being in the studio and just getting that really kind of surround sound picking up distance. And there were some of the really lovely moments when there was something really subtle, quite a way away, you know, that you feel really like you're there. And I suppose it's just one of those things that it's a growing awareness or availability of this stuff, isn't it? And how you direct people to it. I don't know, but I saw the Complicité performance as well, and that was just incredible. I mean, online, and I mean, obviously there's things that would really lend it to you when you really want to be kind of transported into something. I mean, having said that, that's what's beautiful about radio as well, is that you go into an imaginative space through sound. But there's this real depth of field that's really interesting about this.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Tara. That's right. And yeah, anyone else have a sort of a thought on that? On the sort of, you know, is it something that you would want to continue engaging with? And one of the things that I know my mum said that when she listened to it, she said it was so much the first time. It was a lot. It was just so much. It was almost too much, and I was almost overwhelmed. And actually, I had to then go and just kind of get over the fact that it was all in 3D, and then go and listen again, and then I was able to follow it, because the form just completely kind of overwhelmed me the first time, which is also interesting. I don't know if any chimes in. But.
I think that actually, because of just the rise, you know how, you know, this sort of trend in the past 5 years for podcasts and things, a lot more sort of people that don't engage as much with theater might actually be more likely to engage with something like this than a sort of a visual theater piece digitally, or even in real life, I guess. That is so much. I was thinking about that and sort of where it sits in the space. You know, it's obviously not a podcast, but it's it sort of kind of can sit in that space in terms of when you think more broadly about audience, you could potentially attract more audiences towards it than you would have done, or different audiences at least that might be into podcasts. Not to say you need to sort of position it as that, but I do think that sort of that kind of, you know, I think people are quite used to sort of tuning into something, whether it's on their headphones or otherwise. Obviously, you need your headphones for this, but Yeah, I think I don't know. It's in my head. If you got someone like BBC Sounds, that would be amazing for like distribution and also to sort of like reach sort of different audiences. But then also like, you know, you could, this is just like a social media thing, but you could also still do it through like, you know, you could share it through your own contacts and links and things like that as well. But yeah, I think it's really, really cool. And it has like so much potential. Like when like my boyfriend listened to it yesterday, and he one of the first things he said after was like, oh, like it'd be really interesting to see like what else they do with it. Like this is such a really, really interesting piece. And then obviously like what would be next? Like what kind of, you know, where does it go from here in terms of like this technology? So I really enjoyed it. But that's just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this idea of engaging non-theatre audiences. I think there's going to be probably a challenge for you with this form in terms of, again, I'm thinking about how you like package the experience for people, because again, it's a relatively new form that people are not going to understand how to encounter necessarily, or how to encounter in the most, in a way that maximizes like the content. So like, you know, a broad audience, like just putting it on in the background like you would a podcast, is going to be really unsuccessful and prohibitive in the way that like almost you said your mom listened to it and then felt overwhelmed. But I wonder if she would have done if she'd like, you know, gone and turned the lights off and like, put her feet up on the sofa or something and put herself into a very specific space to experience it. And it would be interesting to know how many people did that and what experience they had vis-a-vis people that maybe just like put some headphones on and kind of just didn't fully go along with those sort of elements of the experience. I think that would be the thing, will be the more of this kind of work that gets made, the more people will understand that is possibly how the experience needs to be. Or you'd have to experiment with making a form of binaural work which was perhaps like less immersive, and because you've really gone for like the full impact of feeling like you're in that space, which is then obviously quite alienating if someone's not actually like giving it their full attention.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that at the beginning. People were just kind of sharing how they experienced it, and you know, and a range of ways in which his experience. Ben also said that he experienced it first with eyes closed and lying down, and then second while doing other things, and felt actually that the both were pretty good. But Anne also said that she started off with eyes open and then actually stopped and re-listened with eyes closed. So, and it two different experiences on that.
I kind of guess the life of what happens next with it, or what might happen next with it, depends upon how much control you want to exhibit over the listening experience. Because like Bespoke app with 10 different mini plays on, binaural plays on, you can design the image, you can design what the app looks like, and you can design so much about how they interact with it. Or if it's put on Audible or something that's a more generic platform, then you lose some control over the experience, but you gain the opportunity to interact with more people. So it's that trade-off, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing also is, you know, whether or not we are specific in how people should experience it, yeah, or not, or just let people work it out for themselves.
Yeah, I guess I did have a kind of broader question that kind of came up from all the different things that we've been talked around, like the kind of, the content and the sort of embodiment and the symptoms being triggering. So I guess my very broad question was just like, what did you want your audience to kind of ideally get out of this? What audience experience or reaction were you aiming for?
So I guess so certainly when I sort of first had an idea about doing something binaural about COVID, it was right after I'd been ill. And so I talked to Sam about it, and we kind of talked about, and I kind of said that I was feeling like really positive afterwards, despite the fact that the industry was kind of just in free fall and everything was really uncertain. But I had this weird positivity of just feeling really happy to be alive, and everything just felt really great. I guess because, you know, I wasn't breathless anymore and the sun was shining and it just felt really good. And even though everything was uncertain, it kind of didn't matter because I had this real buoyancy of feeling of renewal and almost rebirth. And I guess that really chimed with stuff that we'd been talking about around story structure, and particularly like the hero's journey, like the kind of this idea of like setting on a journey, crossing a threshold, going off into a kind of magical realm and coming back somehow wiser. So that was kind of what we then approached Lavinia with, and we were just like, well, what do you think about this? And she, you know, I think she sort of then took that in this kind of magical direction, so I think that was certainly for me, and it'd be interesting to ask Rob and Lavinia this as well. But for me, it was sharing that feeling of rebirth in spite of everything with an audience, and optimism and possibility, I guess. I don't know if Lavinia, do you have anything to add to that?
I have. It was, I'm asthmatic, so I understand what it's like to be, I have been in places where I haven't had an inhaler and I've almost collapsed. So there was the sort of companion feeling of extreme fear when you can't breathe. And I wanted, because I've survived, and it's like you say, you get a kind of elation that life continues, you're fine. And during the run of the play, my son was tested positive for COVID and went through some pretty awful symptoms. But because of the play, because of talking to you, and you told me what you'd been through, I wasn't as scared about what could happen as I might have been. It kind of gave me it gave me hope, and I think it probably gave my son hope, because I wasn't panicking as much. I was thinking, no, it's, you know, you'll be okay. It might be awful, but you'll be fine. So it's left. Actually thinking through the process, and with your wonderful and terrifying notes about what you experienced, I've thought it through, and it's made it bearable, and I think that's what I wanted to do, because it's life goes without saying it's precious. But it's all about the isolation, as you said, when somebody has to self-isolate, and then the symptoms, you know, in isolation, and the fear of experiencing something that you don't know how it's going to happen. You know, you don't know how it's going to take you. You don't know what's going to happen. It's such a positive thing to actually, and that's why I transferred it into something that was slightly surreal, magic realism. Because I think it addresses fears better than actually something that stays in it, just bouncing around the symptoms and the fears. There's something more, and that's why we have stories. That's why we have, like, the hero's journey. This thing that we're all going through, it's happened many times before. People have experienced, and people to come through it with something like you have, with something incredibly positive. And it felt important to sort of capture that. Is that an answer? Is that enough answer? I'm sorry, I do.
That's a lovely answer, Lavinia.
I lose tangents, so I'm afraid.
That was not at all a tangent. That was an excellent answer.
Oh, I'm so glad.
That was a wonderful answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it also makes me think about, in terms of potential future iterations or future lives of the piece, it does seem that there's something very interesting in both having delivering something that could be educational, or that could kind of produce a sort of collective knowledge or experience out of experiences that are all very dispersed and isolated and happen without other people being around, as well as having something that is kind of giving people a kind of an experience of something kind of rejuvenating and uplifting and sustaining. Yeah, and obviously, you know, I wonder if there would be some kind of application for it in terms of people that are interested in communicating things around, you know, medical conditions. It's really interesting that the whole kind of COVID pandemic happened just at the end of a 5-year Wellcome funded project called The Life of Breath. And the whole kind of onus of that project was basically breath and breathing problems are kind of really invisible health conditions, and we need to kind of research cultural imaginaries of these things because they get kind of neglected, and the kind of lived experience of breathing difficulties just kind of gets sidelined. And then the project literally comes to the end of its funding period in like April of this year, which is kind of really interesting. But it does seem like that the piece is kind of delivering something like that as well, like something that does feel more educational in a way. Although that's obviously not all that it is, but there is something interesting in that, I thought, as well.
I've also got an answer to hurl at you all. And I think there's something, again, we're talking a lot about these kind of very, very direct symptoms of coronavirus. But I really enjoyed writing the music, especially in the middle section of this piece, where the protagonist really begins hallucinating and appears to be going really mad. And although I haven't had coronavirus, as far as I know, I think it's in that space of madness that I very much kind of made something that riffed on my own experience of this year. And I think lots of people in that when our first national lockdown hit, I was locked down in my house on my own with no one, and I definitely found myself feeling like I was going quite mad, even though I wasn't ill. I certainly felt like I was going a bit nuts. I spent more time talking to myself and also to objects in the house. I have a habit of doing that anyway, but I felt like I did it more, and I felt less sure of myself mentally because I'd never spent such a long period of time without seeing anyone. And that was very troubling. I found that a really, really tough experience, in the same way that like lots of people have had very tough experiences of the very physical and mental symptoms of actually having COVID. And there's this flip side of it where loads of people haven't had it but have had equally kind of traumatic experiences in their own way. So there's kind of lots of different avenues that kind of get brought up, and for me that was something that certainly when I was doing the music, like away from the recording stages, which are all fascinating, but just as I got into the stage where I sat on my own in the studio and thought back to that period of time earlier in the year where I was on my own, not being creative and not wanting to be creative, where I was finally kind of channeling some of that energy that is very much in the work from my point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Yeah, I guess that is kind of that's kind of the thing, isn't it? These coming together of different bounce backs and rejuvenations. And yeah, I guess we're coming to the end of our hour now, and I feel like these kind of series of bounce backs just feels like a nice positive note to leave it on. I hope that comes across, and that you feel, even though you feel a bit traumatized, that listeners also feel kind of held and empowered by it as well. Like, you know, maybe it'll be okay. And I think kind of lovely to hear that, Rob, because yeah, maybe it's not just about the madness of coronavirus, but it's kind of the madness of the summer too. One of the things that Lavinia has done with the text, which I think is really interesting, and also was challenging as well for us to think about how we represent it, is that time is weird in the piece, and it stretches. The time between first symptoms for her and collapse is quite short, and then actually by the time she wakes up and she comes out of this madness, like weeks and weeks have gone by. You know, we hear like lots of NHS claps to try and hint at that sense that time's weird. And she says when she wakes up, it's like Taurus withdrew from the zodiac. And so, yeah, and what was one of the things that I think was really interesting about Lavinia's piece, that it was this sense of somehow like, where's the year gone? What's happened? What we were all bored, but it went fast somehow, and it's been a real roller coaster. And while we were making it, one morning I was listening to Radio 4, and Simon Armitage was on with one of his poems that was called Corona Coaster, and it kind of really resonated. And I was like, yeah, actually, there's something about this is that kind of testament. And I guess that also is a bit of an archival recording of that kind of feeling that we've maybe all had, the Corona Coaster. Yeah, well, I guess, yeah. Unless anyone has any things that they'd love to say, we've got some nice comments from Love the Spore characters, and yeah, Statistics Spider is my spirit creature. But yeah, unless there's anything final that people feel I want to say, just give me a wave if there is. I feel like, yeah, we can bounce back onto the next step of the Corona Coaster, and maybe see you all next week. Next week, we should say something about next week. Sam, do you want to introduce next week before we go?
So I tend to be quite quiet on these things because my internet is terrible. So I may disappear, in which case take over. But next week we have the first of our shared weeks where we have two different artists are going to be inside the theatre at the same time, both of which somehow deal with interactivity, experimenting, and digital work. So there's one piece that was written 22 years ago, made to 22 years ago, and as an interactive poem.
And photo gallery. It's a sort of like experience of, it's like an art book, right? Yeah. And so that's one piece by Paul Trevor, who's a photographer and poet. And the other piece is a piece called Noises in Online Places, which is a sound that's I'm imagining no one heard that exact thing, but because Sam, you just cut out just on the description, but do you want to give it a go?
On cue. So Noises in Online Places is a sound labyrinth online that you can click through, an online gallery that has different sounds, different conversations that you can tune into, scattered around the screen. You can zoom in and play your way through an art gallery. And that's by a woman called Margarita Novakova. And both of those will be on in our theatre for the next week from midnight tonight. And we'll have a post-show discussion at the end of the week in the same way about what comes up from experiencing those things. And then the week after, we have in our Zoom conversation at the moment, the next people for the week after, which is Tara Downs and Radio Drugdoc, working with radio and potentially binaural. And we're going to go down and work out how we do this together with our binaural mic. And do you want to, how's it going? You're working on it at the moment, aren't you, Tara?
Yes. Well, I mean, I didn't mention anything in talk, but I'm really curious because, I haven't done anything with binaural mic, but we've got the potential to, thanks to you. And I'm working on a project which combines working with radios and theatre. And the theatre show is about radios. And what we've been working on is bringing more and more of that voices and sound in the theatre show with the character through the different radios. So I'm in the process of working on that, and now how we were going to present it, which is not as a actual theatre show anymore, well, not this year anyway, Sam and Tyrrell have suggested using the binaural microphone. So I'm really curious having not had any experience of it, and we'll have a very short time to do a recording, how we're going to combine, because there is a visual element, and I can see, you know, like you chose to go for the deep immersion and totally closing your eyes and having that very intimate surround thing. We've got quite a lot of interesting bits to look at as well in our setup, and I'm wondering, and there's been conversation with Stamping in the Graveyard last week as well about where it becomes too distracting to see something, and where you make that transition point. So, I mean, we've got a lot of questions in the next week about how we're going to do this, because it could be, you know, ours can be another version of this experiment. You know, what will it be like if we do have listeners with a binaural experience but watching something as well, and it's not such a lie down on the sofa kind of thing anyway. Will it work or won't it? You know? And we're interested in making a transition from the visual into just the sound, and just as in the play is meant to become more and more a radio show. So it's kind of happening on a virtual level now as well. But I really, yeah, there's more conversations to be had about that before, or if anyone else has got any experience of that, or who was involved in this, if you had thought processes about if it was going to be something that you would see something as well. Although with this piece, it really feels so made for being in your, you know, only in your ears and your mind and your body.
Well, I think,
yeah, we're in a different situation with ours. Yeah.
Well, what I'm really excited about with your piece is that we're going to experiment with live streaming binaural for the first time, which is going to be very cool. And obviously,
well, I was just questioning that this week with Sam, because our internet isn't brilliant here either.
Oh,
so
yeah,
we were
okay.
wondering about that, but we'll see. Yeah,
We'll have
but
to
we
talk
would like
about
to do it
that,
as a live kind of experience, even if we, yeah.
Well, I guess there's something really interesting for not being able to go into a space where there's going to be radios coming at you, old radios coming at you from all these different angles, and then just popping a pair of rubber ears there instead, that can be every audience member. It's a kind of cool thing. Quite exciting.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know then, like when you were discussing about things like the ducks taking off, like the feeling of really just being in a room around those things, because at the moment we set up the radios in the gallery here at SVA just for a few days, and just getting those different sounds and the qualities of those sounds from a different type of radio. They've got very different tones. So yeah, it's kind of about room space, but we might have a lot of weird feedback as well. So it could be interesting. We've already had some strange radio phenomena happening. That's a bit difficult to understand what's happening in the physics of it. So if you bring in virtual and binaural streams at the same time.
Well, live or recorded, or, you know, with Ghosts in the Machine, I'm really excited to see what happens. But so that's in 2 weeks' time, which is going to be, I think a really cool experience. So,
and it really is R&D, I was going to say. Exciting
cool.
R&D.
Well, and we've got more shows as well. You can check our program on the website, in the box office for the final two pieces. There's there's 1 week with 5 different people in, which is going to be cool, changing your process. And then we've also got Us Post 2033, but by Kamal Khan in the final week. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming and participating and sharing your responses and thoughts. Has been really helpful and really, really useful for us to understand a little bit more about what this thing is that we've made. So really appreciate it and appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody. If you fancy it, buy us a drink in the bar. The money gets split between the artists and whatever, if you can or are in a position to do so. It's digitallyceum.com/bar, and you can buy us a drink. And thank you everyone for your time, and hopefully see you at another one of these discussions. It'll be every week until mid-December. So yeah. All right. I'm going to close the meeting now, and